I remember the first time I felt it. That spark. That forbidden thrill. It was during a photo shoot for a major client, and the studio was alive with chaos and creativity. Models struck poses under glaring lights, their skin glistening with sweat, while makeup artists darted around with brushes and powders. The air smelled of hairspray and the faint tang of darkroom chemicals drifting from the back. I was adjusting a light stand, my hands steady despite the nerves buzzing through me, when Aiden's voice cut through the noise. "Sarah, can you shift that light a bit to the left?" he said, stepping closer. His tone was calm, professional, but there was a softness in it that made my pulse quicken. I moved the stand, and as I did, his hand brushed mine. Just a fleeting touch, barely a second. Our eyes met, and time seemed to stutter. His blue gaze held mine, intense and unreadable, and a jolt of something electric shot through me. I yanked my eyes away, heat creeping up my neck, praying no one else had seen. I'm Sarah, by the way. Mid-20s, a photographer with big dreams and a stubborn streak, working at one of the city's top studios. It was everything I'd wanted, until recently, when my focus started slipping. The studio itself was a maze of art and ambition. Walls, lined with framed shots of moody landscapes and striking portraits. Tripods and lenses scattered across tables. The constant click of shutters filling the space. I'd landed here a few months ago, eager to prove myself. But now I was distracted. Aiden was the reason. He wasn't just any photographer. He was the studio's star, a name people whispered with awe. Tall, with dark hair that fell, just shy of messy and a charisma that pulled everyone in, he had a way of making you feel like you mattered. To me, though, it felt different. The way he'd linger when he handed me a lens, the quiet, "Nice work, Sarah," he'd murmur when no one else was around. It was subtle, but it was there, and it was dangerous. Then there was Nicole, his wife. She worked here too, a photographer with a sharp eye and a warm smile that could light up a room. Blonde hair swept into a loose bun, she moved through the studio with quiet confidence, though her shots never quite got the praise Aiden's did. They were the perfect pair on the outside, creative, passionate, unstoppable. But I'd caught the cracks, the way her laugh faltered when he walked by, the tight silences that stretched too long. Something was off, and I hated how much I noticed. I tried to bury my feelings for Aiden. He was my boss, for one, and married for another. Crossing that line wasn't who I was, or who I wanted to be. I'd always been the one who followed the rules, who worked hard and kept her head down. But every time he stood a little too close or flashed that half smile, my resolve wobbled. It was wrong, I knew it, but the pull was stronger than I'd expected. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and persistent. Yet there was this thrill too. A secret I carried alone, tucked into the corners of my thoughts. That evening, the shoot wrapped up, and the studio emptied out. The models left with their entourages, the lights dimmed, and the hum of activity faded into a soft stillness. I stayed behind, sorting through the day's photos at a cluttered desk, the glow of a monitor casting shadows across my face. I liked these quiet moments, the chance to breathe, to think. But tonight, my mind wouldn't settle. It kept drifting back to Aiden, to that touch, to the way he'd looked at me. Then I heard it, raised voices from the back office. My hands stilled over the keyboard. It was Aiden and Nicole, their words muffled by the closed door but sharp with anger. I couldn't catch much, just fragments like, "You promised," and "not again." But the raw edge in their tones made my stomach twist. I should have left, grabbed my bag and slipped out before I heard more. But I didn't. I sat there, frozen, some part of me needing to know. The argument grew louder, then cut off abruptly. The door slammed open, rattling the frame, and Nicole stormed out. Tears streaked her face, her usually steady hands trembling as she clutched her phone. She didn't see me, didn't even glance my way as she swept past, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Aiden emerged a heartbeat later, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with something heavy. Frustration, maybe, or regret. He stopped when he saw me, his gaze locking onto mine across the dim studio. For a split second, I thought he'd say something. His lips parted, his chest rose with a breath. But then he turned, shoulders stiff, and walked off after her. I sat there, heart pounding against my ribs, the silence pressing in around me. What had I just witnessed? Their marriage wasn't my business, I told myself. None of this was. But as I stared at the empty doorway, a question lodged itself in. My mind, sharp and insistent. What was breaking between them? And why did it feel like I was already tangled up in it? I didn't know it then, but that night was just the start. If you're wondering what happened next, stick around. And hey, if you like digging into workplace secrets like this, maybe hit that subscribe button. You never know what I'll confess to next. After that night, the studio felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. The hum of the lights, the click of cameras, it all seemed sharper, more intense. I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept slipping back to Aiden's touch, to the way his eyes had lingered on mine. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment of weakness, but deep down, I knew better. Something had shifted between us, and there was no going back. A few days later, Aiden called me into his office. "Sarah, we've got a big project coming up," he said, his voice steady, but his gaze flicking to the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's a high-profile client, a fashion brand launching a new line. They want something edgy, raw. I need you to assist me directly on this." My heart skipped. Assisting Aiden meant long hours together, late nights editing, maybe even location scouts. It was everything I'd wanted professionally, but now it felt like stepping into a minefield. "Of course," I said, trying to sound calm. "What's the plan?" "We'll be shooting at an old warehouse downtown. It's got the perfect vibe, gritty, abandoned, with amazing light. But it's a bit of a trek, so we'll need to scout it first, make sure it's safe." He paused, then added, "I was thinking we could go check it out tomorrow, just the two of us. Get a feel for the space." Just the two of us. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I swallowed hard. Sure, that sounds good. The next day, we drove to the warehouse in Aiden's car, the city fading into industrial outskirts. The silence between us was thick, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the occasional direction from the GPS. I stared out the window, watching the buildings grow older, more decayed, trying to ignore the way my skin tingled with his nearness. When we arrived, the warehouse loomed before us, a hulking relic of another time. Broken windows gaped like empty eyes, and the walls were streaked with rust and graffiti. But inside, it was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through the shattered roof, casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Dust motes danced in the beams, and the air smelled of damp and decay, with a faint metallic tang. "This is perfect," I breathed, already imagining the shots we could take. "The light is incredible." Aiden nodded, his eyes scanning the space. "Yeah, it's got that raw energy the client wants. Let's see what we can work with." For the next hour, we moved through the warehouse, discussing angles, lighting setups, and potential hazards. It felt almost normal, like we were just two photographers planning a shoot. But then, as we stood in a dim corner, Aiden's hand brushed mine again, this time lingering, his fingers curling slightly around my wrist. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, "about the other night." My breath caught. "What about it?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. I didn't mean for you to hear that fight. Nicole and I, we're going through something. It's complicated. It's none of my business, I said, but my voice wavered. Maybe it is. His grip tightened, just a fraction. Maybe you're part of it. I pulled my hand away, my mind spinning. What do you mean? He hesitated, then let out a frustrated sigh. I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah. I know it's wrong. God, I know, but I can't help it. My heart pounded against my ribs. This was it, the line we weren't supposed to cross. Aiden, you're married, and you're my boss. We can't... I know, he cut in, his voice rough. But tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm imagining this. I opened my mouth to deny it, to say I didn't feel anything, but the words stuck in my throat. Because I did feel it. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch. It was like a current running between us, impossible to ignore. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled for it, grateful for the distraction. It was a text from Nicole. Hey Sarah, can we talk? It's important. My stomach dropped. Did she know? Had she sensed something? I have to go, I said, stepping back from Aiden. Nicole needs to talk to me. His face tightened, but he nodded. Be careful, Sarah. I left the warehouse, my thoughts in turmoil. What did Nicole want? And what was I going to say to her? We met at a small cafe near the studio, the kind with mismatched chairs and the scent of fresh pastries. Nicole was already there, stirring, a cup of tea, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed. Thanks for coming, she said, her voice brittle. Of course, I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. What's going on? She took a deep breath, her fingers trembling slightly. I think Aiden is having an affair. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? Why do you think that? He's been distant, working late all the time. And I've seen the way he looks at you, Sarah. Her gaze met mine, sharp and searching. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nicole, I'm not accusing you, she said quickly. I need to know if there's something going on, if you've noticed anything. My mind raced. This was my chance to tell the truth, to confess everything. But what would that do? Destroy their marriage? Ruin my career? And yet, lying felt like a betrayal too. Nicole, I don't know anything about an affair, I said, the words tasting like ash. Aiden and I are just colleagues. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. I believe you. It's just, I don't know what to do anymore. We talked for a few more minutes, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Guilt gnawed at me, sharper than ever. I'd lied to her face, and for what? To protect myself? To protect Aiden? As I left the cafe, I felt like I was drowning. I needed to end this, whatever it was, before it spiraled further. I pulled out my phone to call Aiden, to tell him we needed to stop. But then I saw him across the street. He was standing outside a bookstore, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. She was tall, with sleek black hair and a confident smile. They were close, too close. And as I watched, Aiden leaned in and kissed her. A quick, familiar peck on the lips. My world tilted. All this time I'd thought, what? That I was the only one? That his feelings for me were special? But here he was, with someone else, acting like it was nothing. I turned away, my chest tight with a mix of anger and heartbreak. I'd been a fool, caught up in a fantasy. Aiden wasn't just crossing lines with me. He was playing a game, and I was just another piece on the board. But as I walked back to my car, a new resolve hardened inside me. I wouldn't let this break me. I'd confront Aiden, demand the truth. And whatever happened, I'd face it head on. Little did I know, the truth was far more tangled than I could have imagined, and the next day, everything would change. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Aiden kissing that woman. Casual, familiar, like it was routine. The image burned into my mind, twisting my stomach with a mix of anger and betrayal. How could he? After everything he'd said, after making me believe there was something real between us, I felt like a fool, caught in a web of lies I hadn't even woven. By morning, my resolve had hardened. I wasn't going to let this slide. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I found Aiden in the studio's dark room, the red light casting an eerie glow over his face as he developed prints from our last shoot. The chemical smell was sharp, almost suffocating, but I barely noticed. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "Aiden," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." He glanced up, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Sarah, now's not a good time." "I saw you," I cut in, the words spilling out. "Yesterday outside the bookstore, with that woman. You kissed her." His hands stilled over the trays, and for a moment, the only sound was the drip of developer fluid. Then he sighed, setting down the tongs. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I demanded, stepping closer. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like you're cheating on Nicole. With her, and maybe with me too." Aiden's jaw tightened, and he turned to face me fully. "Sarah, I'm not cheating on Nicole. Not in the way you think." "What does that even mean?" My voice rose, frustration bubbling over. "You told me you couldn't stop thinking about me, that you felt something. Was that a lie?" "No," he said quickly, his eyes locking onto mine. "It wasn't a lie. I do feel something for you, but it's complicated." "Stop saying that," I snapped. "Just tell me the truth. Who is she?" He hesitated, then ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "Her name is Mia. She's someone I used to know, from before Nicole." "Used to know?" I echoed, skepticism lacing my tone. "We dated years ago. It didn't end well, and I thought I'd never see her again. But she moved back to the city recently, and we ran into each other. That kiss, it was a mistake. A reflex, I guess. But it didn't mean anything." I stared at him, trying to gauge if he was lying. His eyes were earnest, but doubt gnawed at me. "So, you're not having an affair with her?" "No," he said firmly. "I swear, Sarah. It was a one-time thing, a lapse in judgment. I'm not interested in Mia." "Then why did you kiss her?" I pressed, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "Because..." He trailed off, then took a deep breath. "Because things with Nicole are falling apart. We've been struggling for a while, and I've been feeling lost. When I saw Mia, it was like a reminder of a simpler time. But it was wrong, and I regret it." His words hung in the air, heavy, with implication. I wanted to believe him, but the hurt still stung. "And what about us, Aiden? What are we doing?" He stepped closer, his gaze intense. "I don't know, Sarah. I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. All I know is that when I'm with you, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Something real." My breath hitched, and for a moment, I was tempted to close the distance between us, to let myself fall into whatever this was. But then I remembered Nicole's tear-streaked face, her trembling hands. "This is wrong," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "We can't do this." "I know," he murmured, but his hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. The touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I hated how much I craved it. I pulled away, my heart pounding. I need time to think. He nodded, his expression pained. Take all the time you need, but Sarah, please don't tell Nicole about Mia. It would destroy her. I didn't respond, just turned and left the dark room. My thoughts a chaotic mess. Was he telling the truth? Or was this just another layer of deception? The next few days were a blur. The big project was ramping up, and Aiden and I were thrown together constantly, planning shoots, reviewing proofs, coordinating with the client. The tension between us was palpable, a constant undercurrent that made every interaction feel charged. I tried to keep my distance, but it was impossible. Every time our eyes met, every accidental touch, it was like a spark igniting. To make matters worse, Nicole's behavior had changed. She was jumpier, her smiles forced, and she watched Aiden and me with a hawk-like intensity. One afternoon, as I was adjusting a camera setup, she cornered me in the equipment room. "Sarah," she said, her voice tight, "I need to ask you something." My stomach clenched. "What is it? Have you noticed anything off with Aiden lately? Anything unusual?" I hesitated, my mind racing. This was my chance to come clean, to tell her everything. But the words stuck in my throat. "I don't know," I said carefully. "He seems stressed, maybe, with the big project and all." She studied me, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you sure that's all it is? What else would it be?" I asked, feigning ignorance. Nicole's lips pressed into a thin line. "I found something. A text on his phone. From someone named Mia." My blood ran cold. "Mia?" She was an old girlfriend of his. I thought they'd lost touch, but apparently not. Her voice cracked, and she blinked back tears. "Do you think he's seeing her again?" I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Aiden had sworn it was a one-time mistake. But if he was still texting her... "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you should talk to him." "I've tried," she said, frustration seeping into her tone. "But he just shuts down. I don't know what to do anymore." Seeing her like this, so vulnerable and hurt, made my guilt surge. "I'm sorry, Nicole. I wish I could help." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thanks, Sarah. You're a good friend." The word friend felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I wasn't a good friend. I was lying to her, hiding the truth. But what choice did I have? Telling her now would only cause more pain. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Rumors started circulating around the studio. Whispers about Aiden and me, about late-night meetings and lingering glances. I overheard 2 assistants gossiping in the break room. I saw them leaving together last night. Think something's going on? With his wife right here? That's bold. I wanted to scream, to tell them they had it all wrong, but I couldn't, because part of it was true. And if the rumors reached Nicole, it would be disastrous. Then, the night before the big shoot, disaster struck. The client called, frantic. There had been a break-in at the warehouse. Vandalism, graffiti everywhere. The location was unusable. Aiden and I scrambled to find a solution. We needed a new venue, fast. Something that matched the edgy, raw aesthetic the client wanted. After hours of searching, we found an old factory on the outskirts of town. It was perfect. Gritty, atmospheric, with peeling paint and exposed beams. But there was a catch. It was only available that night. We had to scout it immediately. So, at 10 p.m., Aiden and I drove out to the factory, the city lights fading behind us. The building was eerie in the dark, its windows boarded up, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. We moved through, the space with flashlights, our footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. "This could work," Aiden said, shining his light on a crumbling wall. The textures are amazing. Yeah, I agreed, though my mind was elsewhere. Being alone with him here, in the dark, felt dangerous. Every shadow seemed to hide secrets. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart race. As we explored, we found a small office tucked away in the back. Inside, there was an old desk, a broken chair, and a stack of yellowed papers. But what caught my eye was a photograph pinned to the wall, a faded image of a couple, smiling, their arms around each other. "They look happy," I said softly, tracing the edge of the photo. Aiden stepped closer, his shoulder brushing mine. "Yeah, wonder what happened to them." I turned to him, our faces inches apart in the dim light. "Aiden, what are we doing? Us. It's not right." He reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek. "I know, but I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah. I've tried, but I can't." Before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. For a moment, I let myself sink into it, the world falling away. But then, reality crashed back, and I pulled away, breathless. "We can't," I gasped. "Nicole, I know," he said, his voice ragged. "But I'm falling for you, Sarah, and I think you feel the same." I did. God help me, I did. But it was wrong, so wrong. "This has to stop," I said, stepping back. "We have to end this before it's too late." Aiden's face crumpled, but he nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to Nicole. Tell her everything." My heart stopped. Everything? About Mia. About us. She deserves the truth. Panic surged through me. "Aiden, if you tell her, it'll destroy her. And the studio, what will happen to our jobs?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I can't keep lying. It's eating me alive." I wanted to argue, to beg him to keep quiet. But deep down, I knew he was right. The lies were suffocating us all. As we left the factory, the weight of what was coming pressed down on me. Tomorrow, everything would change. The shoot, the confession, the fallout, it was all barreling toward us, unstoppable. But as I got into my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. "I know the truth. Meet me at the studio. Now." My blood turned to ice. What did she know? And how? I glanced at Aiden, who was checking his own phone, his face pale. "Nicole just texted me," he said, his voice hollow. "She says she's leaving me." The world tilted and I gripped the steering wheel to steady myself. This was it, the breaking point. And I had no idea what would be left standing after the dust settled. I drove to the studio with my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. Nicole's text had been short and sharp. "I know the truth. Meet me at the studio, now." My mind raced as the city lights streaked by. What did she know? About Aiden and me? About Mia? My hands shook on the steering wheel, but there was no escaping this. Whatever storm was waiting, I had to face it. The studio loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a faint glow from the back office. I stepped. Inside, the familiar tang of chemicals and paper hitting me like a wave. But tonight it felt heavy, oppressive. Aiden was already there, leaning against the doorway, his face pale and unshaven. He looked like a man who'd just seen his life fall apart. Nicole stood near the desk, arms crossed, her eyes red and glistening with unshed tears. The silence between us was thick, electric, like the air before lightning strikes. "You both came," she said, her voice tight and brittle. "Good. Let's get this over with." "Nicole, please," Aiden began, stepping toward her. But she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't." She reached into her bag, pulled out Aiden's phone and slammed it onto the desk. I found the text, Aiden. To Mia. Every single one. My stomach twisted into knots. So that's how she'd found out. Aiden's shoulders slumped, his voice barely above a whisper. Nicole, I can explain. Explain what? She snapped, her tone slicing through the air. That you've been sneaking around with your ex for months? That you've been lying to me every day? It wasn't like that, he said, desperation creeping in. It was a mistake. I was confused. And confused? Nicole's laugh was sharp and hollow. And what about Sarah? Were you confused about her too? The world tilted beneath me. She knew about us. Of course she did. I'd been a fool to think we could hide it. Aiden glanced at me, his eyes pleading for help, but I couldn't look at him. Guilt clawed at my throat, choking me. Nicole, I'm so sorry, I managed, my voice trembling. I never meant for this to happen. She turned to me, her face a storm of hurt and rage. You were my friend, Sarah. I trusted you. And you've been what? Falling for my husband behind my back? It wasn't like that, I said, the words feeble even as they left my mouth. We didn't. It didn't go that far, I swear. Not that far, she echoed, her voice rising. So what? You just thought about it? You just felt something? Don't lie to me, Sarah. I've seen the way you two look at each other. Tears burned my eyes, but I fought them back. You're right. I did feel something, and I hated myself for it. I tried to stop, but I couldn't. For a fleeting moment, Nicole's expression softened. But then the anger surged back. And you, Aiden. What's your excuse? Aiden exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. I don't have one. I've been a coward. I've hurt you both, and I don't know how to fix it. Before anyone could say more, the studio door creaked open. We all turned, and there stood Mia, her dark hair catching the dim light, her presence like a match thrown into gasoline. Mia? Aiden's voice cracked with shock. What are you doing here? I came to talk to you, she said, stepping inside, her confidence wavering as she took in the scene. But it looks like I'm interrupting. Nicole's eyes narrowed to slits. Oh, perfect timing. The other woman. Come to join the mess? Mia hesitated, glancing between us. Aiden, what's going on? Mia, this isn't the time, he said, his tone sharp. Why not? Nicole cut in, her voice icy. Since we're all here, why don't you tell them the truth, Aiden?